So today we are interviewing a substitute teacher, a para-educator, a youth pastor, and a professional wrestling official. Which interview are you looking forward to most? Let's get it started.
Substitute Teachers Lounge.
All right, guys, it's going to be a good one today. I want to just quickly say, make sure you stick around after the interview. I've got announcements about a couple of other interviews that are going to be milestones as well at the end of today's podcast. One of them includes a famous author, and another one includes a famous podcast host. So I'll talk about that after the interview. So here we go. All right, guys, I am looking forward to today. We have another interview. We have Drew from Kansas, and I really enjoyed reading about Drew's statistics and his resume. We're going to let him share those with us today. Drew, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Greg. I'm actually in the middle of traveling right now. I'm pulled off in a small town at a park, and looking forward to being here with you today, Greg. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. It sounds like you're having a more fun day. I'm basically just sitting in my office, so your day sounds like more fun than mine. I'll tell the listeners what impresses me about Drew is he wears so many hats. He is a substitute teacher. I think he told me he's been a paraeducator. He is a youth pastor, and all that's exciting, but even most exciting, I think he is because he's a pro wrestling official. So, Drew, why don't you just take us through your resume a little bit? Take as long as you want. And I'll be honest with you, I saw on your Facebook page that you're from Alaska, which is one of my favorite states to visit. So, have at it. Tell us about your journey through all that stuff.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I definitely live a pretty exciting life. The main reasoning behind that is I don't really like to be bored. So I kind of try to invest in a lot of different areas. Yes, I'm currently a substitute teacher. This is only actually my first semester as a substitute teacher.
Great.
And I'm a substitute teacher in 3 different districts here in Northeast Kansas, where I live. Yeah, I definitely enjoy staying busy. I am a youth pastor. I'm a youth pastor at about a medium-sized church here in Northeast Kansas. I run about 25 to 45 youth any given Wednesday night.
Good.
Many of which I see in the schools when I go and substitute. Many of which I've met through substituting. Yes, I was a paraeducator for 2 years at the local high school here in the town that I live in. I do substitute teach in that school often now, so it's cool for the students to see me in kind of more of a different role. I definitely miss being a paraeducator and seeing those students' faces every day.
Right.
But it is fun to go in there and see them and see how they're doing now. And I enjoyed going back there and seeing them. The professional wrestling part of my life is pretty crazy. I stay busy on the weekends doing that. Typically on Fridays and Saturdays, I'm on the road traveling. It is like WWE style professional wrestling.
Okay.
And it's always interesting when that comes up, in the classroom or, in the sanctuary when I'm the youth pastor. It's a really fun and exciting part of my life. And I do it because, I'm passionate about it and I think it's fun. But also it gets me around different kinds of people who, sometimes there isn't such an encouraging vibe around that industry. Sometimes there's more of a darkness that kind of clouds that style of business. And so if I can be there and I can be kind of that light in the darkness and kind of be that person that's going to be encouraging no matter what, and it's going to be somebody who they can look forward to seeing and somebody who is always just encouraging. If I'm doing that, then I'm doing my job, and that's all the passion that I need to do that.
I like it.
Yeah, I was born in Alaska. I lived in Whittier, Alaska, which actually is a really fascinating town if you do any kind of research on that town. I'll kind of leave that one open so people can go and look. It's a town that's only has 2 or 3 buildings in it, and
Oh, really?
everybody kind of lives in the same kind of complex.
Gotcha.
So,
I've heard of it, so it's not like it's a city I've never heard of.
right, yeah, and it's a very interesting town. I didn't spend too much of my life there before moving to Kansas, but it's a very interesting thing to kind of think back on and to kind of research. So that's my life in a nutshell. I could talk for hours about any of those, but
Right,
um,
right.
it's I know this is a substitute teachers podcast, so I want to talk about that
Well,
more. But
now some of the things you mentioned really leads into one of the first questions I was going to ask. I think the kids love us to share our stories with them. And I know from what you just said that you've shared some of your wrestling officiating stories. Give me one or two of those that you've shared in the classroom, and what was the students' responses?
yeah, um, so one thing I like to do in the classroom is I like to play two truths and a lie. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am. I
With that
am.
game at all, but for any listeners that aren't, I say 3 things about my life. 2 of them are true, one of them is false, and they have to try to guess which one is false or which one's the lie. Um, and I always bring up as one of my truths that I'm involved in the professional wrestling business, and most students look at that and they think, "What? That is so ridiculous." No, you're not. And so that really opens up that conversation. Um, Really, I just tell them a lot of stories about like what me and my friends do. Me and my buddies when we're on the road going to different wrestling events.
Right.
They always seem to be really fascinated about that. Another thing they seem to be fascinated about with is like if I have any kind of stage name or anything like
Yeah,
that.
right.
They always get really into that. And sometimes if I get the right 6th or 7th grade class, that's all they'll want to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Sixth
Just
graders, especially. You bring up one story, and that's what they want to hear about.
yeah, they'll kind of grab onto it, and that's what they want to hear about. But yeah, it makes for a very interesting classroom dynamic. I'll have several of them that will try to search me up on Google or try to search me up on YouTube, and I'm there. I'm available on all those platforms, and so they find it and they're like, "This is so cool."
Right.
Um, Sometimes it's a cool thing. Other times it gets them a little bit distracted and sidetracked. But I think it's important to make those connections with the students. That way, I might be invited back by what they tell their teacher and things
No
like
doubt
that.
about it. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. The I've found, even, I can't remember if I've even mentioned this to you, but the listeners know I'm a high school volleyball and softball official. And I have found that, you really connect even more strongly when you see these kids in an extracurricular situation. How often do you get to see these kids outside the classroom these days? Do you teach some of those that go to your church?
Yes, I do. There's a 6th grade class at the junior high that I teach at often, and most of my students that come to youth group are in that 6th grade class. And so
Okay.
when I go and substitute in that class, many of those students, uh, many of them refer to me as Pastor Drew, even in the classroom.
Is that right?
Just because that's what they know me as. And sometimes
Right.
other kids would be like, "What, Pastor Drew?" And that kind of opens up that conversation too. Um, but yeah, many of the students that I teach, either at the high school level or the middle school level, many of them do come to our youth events and are pretty involved in our church. And so it's a really cool. That's another interesting kind of dynamic, because also that really opens up uh, the availability for students to invite their friends to youth group, because they can be like, how cool Mr. Drew is. You can go see
Sure.
him on
Opens
Wednesday
the
night
door.
at youth
Yeah.
group. So it's really opened up a lot of doors, and I think even more so than being a para-educator, because with those students I saw them every day. I was invested heavily in their academics, but as a substitute teacher I'm not as invested in that, and so uh, I'm not somebody they look at as somebody who's here to help me with my grades. I'm there to be somebody who is filling in for their teacher, just 1 or 2 days, and if they see me not as much, sometimes they're more inclined to come to youth group to see me. So
Right.
So it's a pretty cool thing.
Right. And we're not just teaching them as substitute teachers. We're trying to build relationships too. So I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with that. Some of the standard questions I like to ask everyone that I interview on here, because we all come from different perspectives. Let me ask you one of those. What do you think when you're substitute teaching? What do you think makes students' favorite substitute teachers their favorites?
I really think it's the substitute teachers that like to have fun. I mean, and some people might disagree with me on that, but
Not
I,
me.
I you're right. I think that there's a fine line between having fun and still getting things accomplished.
Yes.
And I think there's a way to do it both at the same time. When I get into a classroom, I typically start off with having fun. I do an activity or a game, depending on the grade level.
Good.
Oftentimes with middle schoolers, I'll do two truths and a lie, or I'll do Simon Says, just to kind of get just to kind of get off on the right foot.
Good.
That way, it's easier when I say, "All right, now it's time to move on to our classwork." Students are typically like, "Okay, let's get that out of the way so we can do more fun things at the end."
Right. Right.
And I think that's really important. I think it's okay. I think it's fine that subs go in and they have fun, because if you come in and you're just right off the bat, not a happy camper, or maybe even yelling at the kids to sit down or yelling at them to be quiet very first off,
Right.
that's automatically going to put up that wall between you and them.
That
Um,
that's a great answer.
yeah, and so and then if you're having more fun, they're typically probably going to be more inclined to tell their teacher, "Hey, that sub was awesome. Can they please come back?" And then that's
There
another work.
is no doubt about that. Absolutely. You know, it's funny. You've actually answered my second question in your answer to the first, because I was going to ask, how what makes students sometimes feel disrespected and they don't like to be yelled at. We don't like to be yelled at either. So I think that was a great answer. What,
Mhm.
you mentioned, even if we have fun, we have to learn. What traits of substitute teachers do you think help students learn better?
Um, I think it's really important that when we substitute for a certain subject, and we know that we're going in with that subject, I think it's wise that we at least attempt or try to substitute in areas that we might be somewhat knowledgeable at.
Yes.
Um, I know uh, I was an English major in college for a while. Um, and so when I can get the English or the history classes, I know that I know some things about those subjects.
Right.
So those are automatically a little bit easier. Whereas if I get, mathematics or science, I'm not as conditioned in those areas.
Gotcha.
So when I go into it, I automatically know, I might know something about what we're doing in this class as opposed to mathematics or science where I don't know. And I think it's important that we don't just pick whatever sub job comes along. And I know sometimes we have to do that. I think it's important to kind of decide, okay, what are my strengths as far as subjects, and make sure we're kind of gravitating towards those as opposed to going somewhere where we're probably not going to know any of the material.
Yes. That's a good answer. I've been put in the same situation. I'm actually the opposite of you. I'm kind of a math and science guy, and I'm not as comfortable with social studies, although my wife is a social studies fifth grade teacher. So, but I totally agree with what you just said. I think that's a good answer. Have you ever been put in a situation where a need for discipline comes up while you're there, and how do you typically handle it? Not anything like fights or anything, but just general things like being disruptive in the classroom.
Um, Honestly, and some people might disagree with this too. Um, as far as disruptions, I always try to find ways to avoid having to send students to the office. That's the last thing I want to do.
Me
um,
too. Me too.
and I might send them to the hall for a few minutes, but I try to avoid and do everything I can either to not send students to the office or not have to have the principal or administration come into the classroom. Um, the the main thing I do if a student is being disruptive, I actually encountered this about 2 weeks ago at a high school level. There were some students that were kind of picking on another student in the class, And I just, at first I kind of was just listening to it and I was seeing how it might escalate. And so I first just gave a warning, generally, just to kind of the whole class. And I said, make sure that if we're, doing what we're supposed to be doing, we can chat as long as it's, appropriate chat. And so I kind of just gave a general, to the whole classroom kind of thing. And then I noticed that this student specifically was kind of picking on this other girl. So I went and just quietly to him, kind of just gave him a warning.
Yes.
And I said, I don't want this to escalate even farther. I don't want this to escalate to levels of, harassment or things like that. And so if we can just kind of nip it in the bud right now, we won't have any major kind of issues here. And that's not what I want here. And he kind of, that kind of softened him a little bit. I think that really kind of worked with him. He did make one or two more kind of snide comments, but I could tell he was a little bit impacted by what I told him. And I think really he was just showing off for some of his friends because he had his buddies in the classroom with him. And so I did end up sending that student to the hall for 5 minutes, and I had a conversation with him in the hall. And I just said, this can't be happening in the classroom. I don't know what your typical teacher allows, but I'm not going to allow this because I don't think that's right. And so I told him he's not in trouble, just that he needed to take a break from the rest of the class for a few minutes. And so I think when he came back in, he was fine. He kind of sat there quietly for the 10 or 15 minutes that remained in the class. And I think there's ways to de-escalate situations. And there's definitely ways to make situations worse, even being the substitute teacher.
No doubt.
Because if the wrong substitute teacher had that kid and just started screaming at him, that would have, escalated into a shouting match, and who knows what would have happened from there.
Right.
We have to go in with a sense of, I don't want to send students to the office today. And I think some substitute teachers go into the classroom thinking it's more of like a power trip, and it's not.
I agree.
I think I'm a substitute teacher so that I can invest in the next generation in a unique way. As opposed to, making $100 a day or whatever it is we're in your district.
That's basically it. Right around there. I think it sounds like from your answers, me and you would get along great. We might have to meet up one of these days, and we share a lot of the similar thoughts. Let's turn that around a little bit. Do you ever reward students, and how do you do that, and why do you do that?
I'm still kind of trying to figure out the best ways to do that. Just because I feel like a lot of classrooms are really different. A lot of students would love, chocolate or candy or whatever it is when they're behaving well. But other students, I've experienced some classrooms where they really appreciate just kind words.
Right.
I remember one instance actually in the 6th grade class that I was mentioning earlier. One student finished their assignment rather quickly, and he'd actually done a good job. I looked over his assignment and saw that he answered most of the questions correctly. And so I told him, good job, I'm proud of you. And I could tell that meant everything to that student. I could tell that maybe he's never been told that by, a teacher or a parent or a grandparent or whatever. And so once that happened, as soon as every other student finished up and they said, Mr. Drew, I'm done, I would just say a quick, encouraging word to them. And actually one of the students towards the end, he said, Mr. Drew, I'm done with my packet. And I said, cool, turn it into the box. And he kind of looked at me because he noticed I hadn't said anything encouraging to him. So he kind of looked at me and he was like, well, are you proud of me? And I was like, yes, I'm proud of you, of course.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome, man.
With that class,
that's really good.
Yeah, and that's 6th graders. You would think 6th graders would want the chocolate or the candy.
Right.
But
right.
They really wanted just someone to encourage them. So
yes, I agree. I'm actually at the end of my list. Is there anything that you want to share with us before we get out of here?
Man, I think just have fun. A lot of subs, I think, just don't have fun. And I've asked students, what they would prefer me to do. If I go to a new school, sometimes I ask them, the students, what they prefer me to do as their substitute. And a lot of them will say, have fun with us. We aren't just there to pretend to be their teacher for a day. We're there for a reason. We have a job to do.
Right.
And I think part of that job is building relationships and making sure that students, no matter who they are, no matter what they look like or what they wear or how they smell or what they talk
You're
like,
right.
every student is important. And I think some people a lot of times forget that. And so I think going into the classroom with that attitude, this job can be very stressful, but also very rewarding. And I right now, I love this so much. I almost want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right.
But
Oh, and
I
my
mean,
my listeners here know I've said the same thing. I retired as from accounting of all things in 2018, and I wish I'd been an educator.
yeah. And people ask me all the time, are you going to go back to school? Are you going to go, become a teacher? And I've really thought about that. And substitute
Yeah,
teaching, that's something that made me really, that really made the gears start grounding in my head about doing that. So that may
right.
be what I do. It may not. I don't know. But uh, it's an encouraging job, and I hope that all substitute teachers go into the classroom with that mindset that these students need good adult relationships in their life, and we can be a part of doing that for them. So,
Man, that's great. That's a great interview. I really appreciate, Drew, you being here today. And don't hesitate to ever email me if you ever need anything. And I will probably do the same when I need something from you. Okay, I know that sounds like an abrupt end to that interview. We actually had an internet issue right at the end of that, but don't worry, we did say some cordial goodbyes, so you didn't miss any of that other than us saying goodbye to each other. And Drew has a copy of that, so I'm glad you got to listen to that. That was a great interview. It's funny how all of us or all the people that I've interviewed have said different answers as we go through the standard questions, and we all approach it a little bit differently, but we all have the same interest at heart. We want to build relationships with those kids. We want them to learn things as well, and we want to make the class fun. So I'm glad that we got to talk about that with Drew. Now, I know that he has shared his Facebook information with the kids he teaches. So his name's Drew Chandler. I know he wouldn't mind you Googling him too. Maybe you'll get to see him officiate one of his pro wrestling matches, or maybe you'll get to drop in on him at his church, and I know he would appreciate that. So I'm glad he got to spend some time with us. So just real quickly before we end today, we've got interviews scheduled 2 of the next 3 weeks. One of those interviews, you heard me touch on intermittent fasting last week. I have a best-selling author, Jen Stevens, scheduled to interview in the next 3 weeks. She is going to be talking about her current book called Delay, Don't Deny, and that is out right now. I would encourage you to buy that. She's got another book coming out this summer. I will let her tell you about all that. It took me 10 days to get sold on the concept. I would encourage you to read that book. It's only going to cost you about $10 on Kindle. I will tell you, I have been at it for 10 days. I was shocked that I really didn't feel that hungry. There are a whole lot of different ways you can try her plan. You don't have to do it exactly the way I do. You can be more strict. You can be a lot less strict. What I do is basically fast for 20 hours a day. Yeah, that sounds like a lot, but it really hasn't affected me that much. And then I eat whatever I want in those 4 hours remaining. And in the first 10 days, I lost 1.5 inches off my stomach, and I lost 4.5 pounds. So it's working for me, and it's really more of a lifestyle change, but I don't want to take any more of what Jen is going to tell us here in a few weeks. Also, we're going to have an interview soon with 2 co-hosts of the Curious Kid podcast. That will be Jacob and Olivia. And again, I don't want to take too much away from that, but I would strongly encourage you to go to their Curious Kid podcast and subscribe to it now. It's a great resource in the classroom, and that's what we'll be discussing with them. So we got some great interviews coming up. I hope you can listen to all of them. Look forward to those. Always remember you can contact me at gregcollinssubstitute@gmail.com. You can also go to our Facebook page, Substitute Teachers Lounge. And you can remember, if you want to support us, you can do that at patreon.com/Substitute Teachers Lounge. We will see you next week. Music provided by Ben Sound.